Good morning, boys. I will continue with this poem that we were doing, and we had studied online. I had sent two videos on it. This video will conclude the poem. The name of the poem again, The Village Schoolmaster by Oliver Goldsmith. In the second stanza, we learnt regarding the behavior and the mood which would determine the kind of action the village schoolmaster would take. His demeanor, his outward attitude, his disposition, the manner in which he behaved, and the way he would react to certain situations. How the students had learned to anticipate much more in advance what trouble or misery that could come their way by studying, assessing, analyzing, and understanding the expressions which he would carry on his face every morning. And if they realized that their teacher had a frown on his face, a scowl, an angry look on his face, quickly they would disperse their message among them all, and they would then spread out very quickly as to what unpleasant, unhappy, sad event that would follow or they could experience because of the anger which their teacher carried that day in him, which was evident from the expression which he had or used to have on his face. Now let us have a look at this stanza, these few lines which will conclude the poem. So here, let me read it out first to you. The love he bore to learning was in fault. The village all declared how much he knew. 'Twas certain he could write and cipher too. Lands he could measure, terms and tides presage, and in the story ran he could gauge. In arguing too, the parson owned his skill, for e'en though vanquished, he could argue still, while words of learned length and thundering sound amazed the gazing rustics ranged around. And still they gazed, and still the wonder grew, that one small head could carry all that he knew. Meaning to say that if the teacher had any fault in him, that fault was his great love for learning. He had in him this great passion to learn for himself as far as he was concerned, and to make sure that the students who came to school under his care, they be educated and they learn. He made it very clear to the parents and the village people to send their children regularly without missing school to learn and gain knowledge so that they could become better human beings and find and make a good person in themselves. So he was very, very committed in making sure that every child in the village received an education and learned well. He always ran behind them, chasing them and constantly reminding them that they needed to learn and be educated. So if there was any fault, this fault was his great love for learning. He wanted to learn more and make sure that the students also did the same thing, develop the same kind of passion to learn and educate themselves. Next, the village all declared how much he knew. Now, he already had the respect of his students. The village people, everyone who knew him, regarded him very highly for the great knowledge he possessed or he had. They looked up to him, they respected him, they had great admiration for the kind of person he was, how educated he was. They respected him in that light. 'Twas certain he could write. It was very clear and evident. It was very certain that he had exceptional writing skills as far as writing was concerned, as far as the use of language was concerned. He had great skills at writing. So he had a very sound vocabulary. He was very good with words, and he was good at using the language. He had great writing skills, or he had great acumen and ability to write. He was good at using the language, and he was good at writing. And it was very clear to all. Everybody admired this unique skill that he had at writing. And not only writing, and cipher too. He was very good at mathematics. He could calculate huge numbers, and he could calculate without making mistakes or committing errors. He could precisely, very correctly calculate. So his skills at mathematics were equally good as his skills at writing. So cipher well means he was very good with numbers as well. Lands he could measure, terms and tides presage. He was not only good at writing, not only good at mathematics and calculations, he was very good at measuring land. He was a good surveyor. S-U-R-V-E-Y-O-R, surveyor. Surveyor meaning one who had this keen understanding of measuring land, correctly mark and draw out the borders, thereby resolve the problems or disputes which arose between farmers or among farmers. So he was a good surveyor who had this ability to correctly measure land, draw out borders, and do it with a lot of confidence. So he could measure land, terms and tides. He could predict. Presage means he could correctly predict the weather conditions that were to follow: rain, hail, storm. All that he could predict. Terms and tides he could very precisely and correctly predict. Foretell, F-O-R-E-T-E-L-L, foretell, if there were to be tides. So he could correctly and precisely, without errors, predict or foretell weather and tides. Presage, foretell or predict. And Ian means even the story ran. This story went around among the people in the village that he could gauge, he could, Gauge meaning estimate correctly, evaluate correctly, or calculate the value of something very correctly. So he had that talent in him as well. He could estimate the value of something very correctly. So this story also went around in the village that he was very good at estimating, calculating and evaluating the values of things. In arguing, as far as debating was concerned, arguing means debating. Arguing here, debating. He was a very good debater, a very good speaker, orator, and a debater. Orator, O-R-A-T-O-R. Orator means a good speaker, and he was very good at debating. So, at arguing, so here the word it, at arguing also he was extremely good. At debating he was extremely good. He had the gift of speech. The parson owned his skill. The parson, the village preacher, he too admitted that this village schoolmaster was highly skilled as far as him debating on various subjects, discoursing on various subjects. Discoursing means debating or arguing on various subjects. He was very good as a debater, and even when he was vanquished, even when he lost an argument or a dispute, he was a fierce, F-I-E-R-C, fierce opponent. He was a fierce opponent. He would not give up easily. Even when he lost a debate on a certain topic or a subject, he would carry on trying to prove his point, being a fierce opponent, not easily giving up. Even when he was defeated, vanquished meaning defeated, even when he was defeated at an argument on a certain topic or on a certain subject, he would carry on trying to prove his point and not give in, not submit, not surrender very easily. He was therefore a fierce opponent. He could argue, still he could go on trying to prove his point and convince that he was in a way correct, and he would use to convince and to prove his point correct, he would use high sounding words, high falutin words. He would use high falutin words. High falutin means high sounding words to create this effect and to prove his authority and his hold, his skills and his ability in using these words. So, even when he lost debating on a certain topic or a subject, he would still carry on like a fierce opponent, trying to prove his point and convince the people with high falutin words, high sounding words, and pronouncing them very clearly with correct diction. Learn words which he had learned, and huge words, big words, pronounce them very correctly. This proved his ability of speech and thundering sound. That is the meaning of high sounding words. He used big words. He used words with difficult pronunciation but got the pronunciations correct to each syllable, each unit sound, and he did it with fervor, with a lot of energy and enthusiasm, trying to prove his point, justify his stand, and not give in or submit very easily, even when he lost on a particular topic or a dispute. And looking at or observing this sort of energy and this sort of attitude, this kind of attitude which he would display in arguing his point correct, the farmers, the illiterate and the uneducated people who would gather around, who would arrange themselves trying to witness or witnessing the parson, the village preacher and the village schoolmaster debating with each other. Now, parson was a very good speaker because his work was to preach and convince the people, his parishioners. So, parishioners means all those people who would come to church to hear him speak. So, he was a very good speaker himself, and he agreed that the village schoolmaster was extremely good, a debater and a speaker. And these uneducated people, the farmers who would gather to witness him debating, they would all gaze, sitting around and watching. And they would be amazed with his ebullience. Ebullience means his energy to argue and prove his point correct. Even when he lost, he would still carry on using high sounding words, using difficult words and pronunciation to justify his point. And they would be gazing, unblinking, without blinking their eyes, all amazed and awestruck, awed and surprised, taken aback. They would admire what? The enormous wisdom which he had, the knowledge that he had on various things, various subjects, and the skills which he possessed using that knowledge to express himself correctly. And still they gazed, and still they wonder grew. And as they gazed, admiring his great skills and abilities at speech and various other things, especially speech, while he would be debating to express himself, they would be wonderstruck. They would be all taken aback, completely absorbed in admiration, awed, taken up by his presence and the way he would argue. And that one small, so what they would be amazed at, and still they gazed, and still the wonder grew. They would be amazed, and they would start to be totally consumed by the great skills that this man had as far as debating was concerned. And they would start thinking, wonder means they would start thinking to themselves that how could This man, this village schoolmaster, in his little head on his shoulder, could carry so much of knowledge, this enormous wealth of knowledge which he carried in his head. They would be amazed and they would wonder, they would start thinking regarding the village schoolmaster's ability to have gathered so much of knowledge and the enormous wisdom which he had as a person in the village. So it proves their admiration for him and how, without a doubt, they trusted and they looked up to him. They had great respect for him and for his knowledge. So, gentlemen, so parson here, the village preacher, and he had many parishioners meaning these people who would go to church every Sunday to listen to him preach. So he also admitted that this particular village school teacher or schoolmaster was extremely good at debating. So, gentlemen, here in this particular stanza, the poet speaks about the various abilities that this man had, all the skills and all the talents which he had. What kind of talent? What kind of talents he had? He was good at writing, he was good at mathematics and calculation, he was good at measuring land, drawing out borders, he was good at predicting the weather conditions correctly, he was good at predicting tides absolutely correctly. Then the story ran that he could estimate absolutely precisely. At debating, he was extremely good, and this was confirmed by the village preacher as well, that he was as good as the village preacher as far as debating was concerned. He had great skills, he was a great debater, orator and speaker, and even though when he used to get defeated on a certain topic or dispute, he would not easily give in, he would carry on trying to prove his point, act as a fierce opponent, using difficult, highfalutin words, pronouncing them absolutely correctly, and whilst he would do so, the simple folks of the village would sit around awestruck, wondering, thinking, how could a man as he carry in his head this enormous, this huge amount of knowledge and wisdom. So it talks about his skills as a teacher and as a person, and the determination he had never to give up, his great passion to learn and acquire knowledge was the only fault according to the poet. If there was a fault in him, this was the only fault he had, his great passion for knowledge. So, gentlemen, the question answers I will be sending it to you across through WhatsApp. Please go through the details, and if you have any problems, any doubts, please do feel free to contact me and let me know your problems. I will be very glad to help you solve your problems. I have not gone into the details of it, like the land tax and things like that, because at your level, let it remain till here. So he was very good mathematically to calculate land tax, like the type T-I-T-H-E, tithe was this land tax that used to be collected from the farmers, and it was 1/10 of the annual produce or the annual earning of a farmer. 1/10 would be collected as tax. He was very good at this cipher, means calculating tax, and this particular tax was called tithe, T-I-T-H-E, tithe. 1/10 of the total earning of a person every year would be given as tax or was levied as tax. He was very good at almost everything as far as village life was concerned, and he was admired for that. Thank you, gentlemen.